Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Liz, for the welcome and the introduction. I am Kathy Ann, for those of you who don't know me, and I am very, very pleased to see y'all here. So good evening, welcome, hi. So thank you to Bob and Graham for helping to organize and to promote this event. I'm pleased to welcome our guests, Councillor Cruikshank and our very own Tabeth to this conversation. So I'm going to set your expectations of what's going to happen. You're not going to speak, you're not going to hear me speak a lot. You didn't come here to hear me speak. You came to hear the panelists. So for the first 30 minutes or so, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to ask the team some questions about their experience, their inspirations, some of the challenges they face, and where they see progress going in the future, what progress they've seen thus far, and then we will open the floor to you for questions. So think about your best, most saluting questions in honor of our sisters, and saluting and celebrating our sisters this evening. So the purpose of this event has been really to kind of get a start of the conversation around some of, how we can support and celebrate the work of members of our community. And we want to get that started. So sisters, salutes and welcome to this event. How are you all doing this evening?
I'm quite all right.
You're quite all right?
Yes.
And what about you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Brilliant, glad to have you. So I want to get started right into the questions with you guys telling us a bit about yourselves, your careers, and your inspirations for choosing the path that you have taken. So I'll start with you, Councillor Georgia.
Okay, my name is Georgia Cruikshank. I became a councillor in 2012. Prior to that, I was very active in the black workers movement, and in the early to mid 90s, I chaired the Black Workers Committee for the STUC and also for my union, the GMB, and also to the TUC Black Workers Committee. So I've got a long history and being active within the black workers movement. And I suppose that come from when issues were going wrong for me, I couldn't find the right advice, if you like. So I remember going to my first all-black conference at the STUC, and I felt a bit out of place because most of what you determine is black. Black is a colour. She's neither black, she's neither black, her hair is. I'm brown. But because of political correctness, you're either black or you're white. So I felt a bit of an imposter, if you like, because I was met with all these sea of black faces, and but I was welcomed, and I don't always get that when I go to the Labour conference where there's very, very few black faces. Most of them, I would say that a majority of them are white, and it's not the same feeling. So that inspired me to continue my activism within the black workers movement. I also qualified as a community education and youth worker way back in the late 80s, early 90s. Dundee is my home. Although I come from Newcastle, I've lived longer in Dundee than I ever did in Newcastle. So I consider myself to be a Dundonian, although I don't have the accent. Not my fault. The same as the colour of my skin is not my fault, but I've been made to be proud of it. I don't know a lot of history about my own background because my father died when I was young. My mother and father divorced when I was a baby. There were 7 of us. I was brought up by my auntie, and then I went back to live with this family with another 6 kids, and I thought, who the hell are these? So I've had to make a lot of adaptations in my life. So enough about my history, let's move on. I will go on to speak about my time in politics, but that's for another time.
Thank you.
Can I get some water, please?
So I'm Tabeth. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. I came to Scotland in 2000. And at that time I came to visit my sister-in-law. I just had a baby, and she wanted to see my baby and was not able to travel home. So I came and stayed. And then in 2001, I joined to do my nursing training. And at that time, I qualified with a nursing diploma. During those days, you qualified with a diploma. And I had a baby to take care of and you know, trying to juggle everything. So I worked full-time as a nurse, and where I come from, you are just inspired to continue with your education. So I was doing my nursing training, and at the same time I thought, let me go back and do a degree, because we were the last stream to finish with a nursing diploma, and I'm thinking, what if they get their promotions at work because they have a degree and I'm left behind? Let me go and join them. So I went back, I joined, and I graduated with my nursing degree only a few months after that. It didn't take long. And because my children were still young and I had to work in a nursing home, I'm thinking, okay, I need to continue with my education, because if I'm going to lose most of my skills as a nurse, at least let me compensate some way. So I went back and asked to do my master's in health and social care. And I qualified in 2009, but the children are still there, you know. And in most cases, you know, sometimes you have to be careful whom you invite. You know, when you do your graduation, I kept inviting my church pastor, you see. And every time he was praying for me, you know, and I'm thinking he's going to say, yes, well done, Tabeth. Of course, he would say, yeah, well done, Tabeth, you've done very well. And then he would go on to pray, Lord, may you make Tabeth see to it. You know, notice that masters is not the highest she can go. And I'm thinking, so there's something else. This is a new challenge. Let me go ahead. And then I did my, my PhD. And then after that, the children were grown up enough for me to move from nursing and come and look for a job to be a nurse lecturer. When we were at home, I grew up with my auntie and my uncle, because my father died at a very young age. I was only 11 when he passed away, and I went to live with his brother and the wife, and they were teachers. So it was always inspiring to teach. We have a lot of nurses in the family, so this is like second nature, teaching and nursing at the same time. So that's my background.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I do have a soft spot in my heart for nurses. My mom's a nurse, so whenever I meet a nurse, I'm like, oh, one of my people. So good to hear your stories and hear your narratives. Let's talk about your careers a bit, and generally, can you share with us some of the challenges that you've seen or faced or observed that you feel relating to race and gender equality can be a hindrance to progress? Tabeth, you want to go
yes. With me, when I first came here, it's also maybe culture and language, so to speak. So when I did my training at home, you do all your training, like in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was colonized by the British. So you do all your education, you know, in English. But when I came here, I thought I knew English. I thought. So the accent threw me off a bit, you know, Dandonia accent, and wherever I went, I'll say, pardon, can you say that again? Pardon? Can you repeat that? Pardon? But you know, sometimes when you keep saying to people, pardon, could you repeat that? Pardon, could you repeat that? And there's always that do you understand English? Do you know English? If one person does that, you are thinking, of course I know English. But if the second person does that, the third person does that, and almost everyone you are meeting, the world has a way of gaslighting you, so to speak. You actually start believing that maybe my English is not so good. Maybe I shouldn't speak as much as I should. Maybe, so it takes you time to then realize, wait a minute, I can speak English, I understand English, it's just the accent. So that's why I have that group that I support, you know, the ethnic minority group, just to remind them that it's an accent, it's not your language. Because if you have done everything in English, of course you can speak in English. Something like that. So yes, accent.
Accent, that's
Dundonian speaks so fast, sometimes 3 words in one. Sometimes you hear, you know, if someone is saying, are you all right? And they say, all right. And you, can you say that again? All right. And you are thinking, okay, what did they just say? They need to say this in slow motion. So yes, that was one of my very first challenges.
Okay, awesome. That's an interesting one. Something that I also experienced, like realizing in Barbados, you think you speak standard English, and then you come and you're speaking to the English, and they're looking at you and you realize, oh, that's not an English way of speaking. That's quite a Barbadian unique terminology. Yes. So it's something you learn once you've moved there, that you realize, I wasn't speaking English all along, even though it is my language, my only language.
Yes.
What about you, Councillor? What about the challenges that you've encountered or observed?
When I first qualified from the course I was doing, I went for a job in youth work, and it was the Roundtree Centre in Dundee, and I was interviewed. And the interviewer said, what makes you think you're suitable for this job? And I said, well, I have an interest in kids, I have an interest in making a difference to people, and I feel I can use my experience. I brought up, I think I had 4 kids at the time, I brought up 4 kids of my own, and I know the challenges. And he said, would you be happy if someone came up to you, one of the kids came up to you and called you a black bastard? I goes, well, I says, I would challenge his thinking, why he's using that word, and you know, what makes me different from him or her, etc. I didn't get the job. And I don't know whether it was because they thought my colour was going to prohibit me from working and interacting with these young people that came from a deprived background. And if you could talk about deprivation, look at Scotswood and Newcastle, because that's where I was brought up, and racism was an everyday thing. And I suppose it became normalised, as we were kids, we were being brought up with it. We woke up in the morning, white paint on the doorstep, wogs, go home. You know, if you fell out with your neighbours. My mother was forever in the street fighting with the neighbours. And there was one good friend I had, but she could not say my name. But she did have a name for us, and it was Gollywog. And my mother answered the door one day, she says, is Gollywog coming out to play? And my mum just says, well, there's no Gollywogs live here, bye. So when you're brought up with that type and it becomes normalised, you know, it runs off your back. It's when you get into adult life that it starts to affect you. Like you're standing in a queue for a taxi to go home, and somebody further up the queue say, that black bastard's no getting in the taxi before me. Now I'm not a fighter, my sisters were, and many a fight did they get into, because I would rather speak to people and find out You know, well, what's your problem?
Mm.
You know, your mum and dad pays thousands of pounds to go on holiday to become this colour.
Yeah.
I says, now I'm this colour all year round. So, I'll go on to my politics now. Now from the early 90s, mid-90s, I joined the Labour Party. And I thought, yes, and I was really fired up because I thought there were so many injustices happening in the world,
Yes.
And especially within Dundee. I worked in an area of multiple deprivation, and there was so much more that could be done that wasn't being done. I thought, well, that could be the difference. And from 1996 until 2012, I worked hard, I supported the Labour Party, I delivered leaflets, I knocked doors, I chatted to people on their doorsteps, I went to the conferences. Nothing I'd done was good enough because Dundee was a man's club, the Labour Party. And I don't care if people repeat what I'm saying because at the end of the day, that's what it was. It's not that now, but that's what it was at that time. And it took me from 1995 until 2012 to get elected on the Dundee City Council. I'm the first black woman, first woman of colour to be elected onto the council. There was a doctor many years ago, and his name just went straight out of my head, who was a councillor. Sometimes we talk about overt and covert racism. So when you're sitting in a room with all white people, they don't notice your colour, or maybe they ignore your colour, more to the point. So it wasn't until the Black Lives Movement and the George Floyd photo was destroyed at the top of the hill town. And me and my colleague put a press release out condemning what had happened, also with the photographs down at the waterfront. So that was fine. And other people, you know, condemned it. But out of all the people that condemned it, I was the only black person, and I was the only person to receive any kind of abuse. Get back under the rock from whence you crawled. Go back to your own country. Who are you to tell us how to think, what to do? Because I was promoting education within school. You know, we've got education within the schools about black history, to dispel the myths that were some kind of aliens or bad people. So that just goes to show the mentality. I mean, when I first came to Dundee, I was told that racism does not exist. I disproved it because it does exist. When I was taking my son to the hairdressers down St Andrew Street, this car come racing towards us, shouting, "Monkeys, get out of the way." My daughter, when she first started school, my youngest daughter, first day, "Oh, Mum, I love it, it's great." Next day, "I don't want to go back to school, I don't like it." Because one of the girls had says, "Don't sit beside her because she's a Paki." I've been called all sorts in my life, and I never ever thought that my kids would be called such names. So I suppose my inspiration, my involvement in politics and the black workers movement stems from the experiences I had with my own kids, not necessarily from my own childhood, but what I grew up with, but from my kids. And I thought, no, I have to try and make this a better place for them.
Yes.
Okay.
Speaking of children, I think when you are experiencing racism, you are thinking it's better it happens to me, but when it happens to your children, you know, it's even more painful. I remember, well, my daughter is now 23, but whenever I used to take my daughter to the shops, you know, with me, in my case, I experienced more of the subtle racism rather than the blatantly open, direct one, because I would rather experience the direct, open racism than subtle racism. Because subtle racism has that psychological impact on you, because you are thinking, was it me, or did it happen, and you doubt yourself in most of the cases. You know, you are thinking, oh, maybe I didn't see it right, and it's difficult to prove. So when you are thinking of subtle racism, for example, with me, whenever I took my daughter to the shops, for example, she likes bright colors. So usually her hair is royal blue, sometimes it's bright pink, and sometimes it's red, you know, something like that. Is someone coming and say, oh, she has lovely hair, and touching, reach out and touch, and in my mind I'm thinking, okay, if I touched your daughter the way you have touched my daughter is only 8, I'm trying to teach her stranger danger and all that, and so many people would just come and, oh, this is lovely hair, no seeking consent. First of all, my personal space, you know, so you have come into my personal space. And then second, you would think touch is very personal. People are going to ask, even when they asked it, oh, can I touch her hair? They did not wait for you to say yes or no. It was, can I touch her hair? And then grab like that. So when it's happening to your child, it's so difficult to explain to her why it is that people are touching her, and then do not let people touch you. It makes it so difficult when it's like that. And in terms of, like I've said, I've experienced more of subtle racism than the open one. Like when I was working, for example, nursing, sometimes you had a patient saying, I don't want her. I want her, you know, and you are thinking, oh, we've done the same job. And of course, some people will say, oh, well, I don't like her, I don't think she'll understand what I want. And you know, okay, that's what it is. So when it happens like that, it's the people around you, isn't it? You are hoping that the people around you, the other staff members would speak up and say, no, that's not it. But when the staff members around you do not speak up and they just say, okay, I'll do what you want, and move you out of the way, and you are thinking, okay, that is another form of racism in itself, even though it's not been direct, you've not done it directly to me, but because your action is in support of an act like that. So half the time you tend to move out, you know, you are silenced, and you are thinking, okay, so how do I handle this if there is no support whatsoever?
Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of the complicity of some of, you know, the people around, even some institutions, in terms of allowing these actions to continue. Also, another colleague was sharing a similar experience of experiencing racism publicly, and everyone just sat quietly. No one said anything because, you know, we don't want the blowback to come on us. We have that fear, without necessarily considering that the person experiencing the racism don't have the, you know, luxury of not experiencing the racism. But in addition to like complicity of the people around us, what other kind of hindrances do you think we have to progress in terms of race equality going forward?
For me, I think that representation is very important. We have to have representation where it matters the most, where we are making decisions. So I'm really grateful that you are in politics and you are there having that representation to say, no, it has to change, it has to be like that. But I'm also a nurse. You know, even though I'm now lecturing, I feel like I'll always be a nurse.
You will always be a nurse.
I will always be a nurse. So when we are looking at maybe promotion, you know, if you look at that report that came out after the COVID, you know, dying on the job, they looked into why most of the nurses who died from COVID and most of the doctors, you know, the people in the healthcare sector died of COVID compared to their white counterparts. And they did find that, you know, when it comes to promotion, usually it's much easier for someone who is white to be promoted and go up the ranks as quickly as possible, whilst the black people, you know, or ethnic minority, it's very difficult for them to be promoted. So by the time we got COVID, for example, right, a lot of the black people, ethnic minorities, were the frontline workers. And when they were told, okay, everybody work from home, everybody else had the luxury to go and work from home, whilst it was most of the ethnic minority who were there to face that. Yeah. You know, it wasn't really equal the way it was. So most probably if we look even at the higher levels to say, okay, are we given as much opportunity as everybody else? Are we being promoted as well? So where you have maybe management level and you now have even just one ethnic minority, it means that in that meeting when they are making decision, someone in there is going to be, wait a minute, what about the ethnic minorities? Can you also think of us? Can you also consider us? So representation is very important.
Representation is important, agreed. Over to you, Councillor, in terms of what hindrances to progress you see.
You talked, Tabeth, you talked about the black ceiling. I've hit that black ceiling so many times and had to come down, well, be thrown back to the ground sort of thing. I found throughout my career, I had to work twice as hard as anybody else to get any acknowledgement whatsoever. I was good enough to be a deputy, but I was never good enough to be the manager. On 2 occasions, I had to manage the project while the project manager was off on long-term sick leave sort of thing. Then she decided that she wasn't coming back, so the job became open. I applied for it along with external. And I had been doing the job, and I know I was doing a good job, but it was given to the external person. But I still went on and I supported the next manager that came in, come and go as they did, applied for the job again, never good enough. So I got to a stage where there's no point. There is no point in putting myself through this. I would be accused of laughing too loud. I had a dirty laugh. I remember one time I had really thick frizzy hair and I straightened it. And that was the only time I got a compliment from my colleagues at work. Oh, your hair's nice. Oh, that looks lovely. Oh, you wouldn't be able to tell that you were coloured because now you've got straight hair. And I thought, that's the the covert racism. I wasn't acceptable with wild frizzy hair, but I was acceptable because I'd straightened it. I go between the two now. I straighten the front, I leave the leave the back. But I suppose you get to a stage where you're past caring. Just live your life, do what you think's right. So when I got into politics, I put me all into politics. I've represented many students from Dundee University in terms of their placements, in terms of you know, how they've been made to feel, sort of thing. I mean, and when you scratch beneath the surface, I mean, when they start telling you the story, you just know it's racism. Yeah. Why should the colour of your skin matter? I've had more racism from workmates, work colleagues, than I have from any of the groups that I've ever worked with. What does that tell you? And I've been up against, I remember a court staff member saying, who does she think she is telling me what to do? Well, I was only asking her to do the job that she was paid to do. But I had become some ogre because I was demanding that people were doing their jobs. Yeah. So
that must be very hard, but at the same time, giving up is not an option.
No, it isn't, but sometimes, you know, it gets you to the stage where, why am I doing this? But I haven't given up. Good. I'm here. I agreed to do this panel tonight because I thought, well, if I can sit here and tell people my story, and then maybe, you know, they can be brave enough to tell their stories and be brave enough to seek somebody out that will listen to them and know what the issues are and be able to help move that person on. Yeah. And that's what I do within my chosen career now.
Yeah. Amazing, and we thank you for doing it. And consequently, as part of that, let's talk a little bit about progress. So this is going to be my last question from me, and then I'll throw it to you guys. But what does progress look like for you, and where have you seen it in Dundee since you've been here? So what does it look like?
Well, given the fact that I'm now a councillor and I had been trying for so many years to be elected, it wasn't that I was unelectable, it was I would get past the interview stage, but then I would get white men knocking on my door saying, we've got somebody in mind for this particular area, he'd be the best candidate, and we want you to step back. And I was adamant at the time I wasn't going to step back, but was at the time there was a bit of controversy going on. I was the first person to set up, well, I wasn't the only person, but ended up being the last person to set up a community credit union. And we didn't have enough volunteers, so the paperwork wasn't getting sent in, so we got Section 95. And because I was the main name in it, it was in the newspapers and everywhere, but it was all investigated. There was nothing untoward. People got their money back and the credit union got closed down. But at that time, I was told I would have reporters camped in my garden day and night if I didn't step back from this, because then I'd become a public entity. So I thought about my family and I thought, well, okay, then maybe it's all right, maybe this is not the right time. And I stood back. And I regret ever doing that because I hadn't done anything wrong. And it was all sorted in the end. You know, it was just a bit of sensationalism by the media. So I regret doing that. So I kept going, until eventually in 2012, the Labour Party had put out a policy that 25% of winnable seats had to go to women. So that would be nobody knocking on my door and telling us, you know, they had a better candidate or whatever. And I won through. And this is my third time being elected. And each time my ratings, well, what do you call them, the electoral votes have improved. So I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
And I represent all people, not just black people. I represent all the people in my ward.
Thank you. And what about you, Tabeth? What does progress look like for you? What have you seen in Dundee?
Yes, for me, I'm really happy that you are seeing a lot of noise being made about equality, and because previously it used to be just a hush thing, but you see a lot of organizations, you know, if you go in and you type racism Dundee, for example, you find football clubs are coming up with anti-racism policies. You find a lot of organizations, Dundee carers, you know, the third sector, and you are thinking, okay, so there is a bit of noise out there. There is still a bit of way to go, but at least that's the start. You are seeing it, and you are thinking, okay, so there is something there. The idea that we are having this conversation, it means a lot to me, and you are thinking, okay, so we are not at a standstill. You know, we are not where we were before. Things may be moving slower than we want, but at least they are moving.